The mechanic lived in a quiet corner of the galaxy, on a small outpost far from the busy trading routes. His days were simple, spent fixing spacecraft engines, repairing broken circuits, and helping travelers who passed through. He was skilled and precise, and people trusted him with machines that even the most advanced technicians hesitated to touch. Despite his talent, life had not given him much excitement or recognition. Every day was predictable, routine, and sometimes lonely. But he never complained. He liked his life. It was peaceful, and he had a rhythm that suited him. One day, as he was polishing a starship engine, a message arrived. It came through the outpost's secure channel and was unlike any request he had ever received. The message was from the Galactic King himself, a ruler whose power spanned multiple star systems, known both for his wisdom and his cunning. The king's messages were rare, and most people feared his attention. Yet here it was, addressed directly to him, requesting his services. The message was simple but mysterious. It asked him to repair a special cargo, urgently, and promised an alien ship in return, a ship unlike any he had ever seen. The words echoed with grandeur and authority, and the promise sparked excitement deep in his chest. A real alien ship, something beyond his wildest dreams. For a moment, he could imagine the possibilities, exploring distant worlds, testing advanced technology, and finally stepping out of the quiet life he had grown used to. He hesitated only briefly before accepting the task. It was a chance he could not pass up. He gathered his tools and prepared his workshop, making sure every instrument was ready. He double-checked the security systems, reviewed the protocols for handling unknown alien materials, and readied himself mentally. He knew the king's requests were never simple, and he had to be careful. But his curiosity and excitement outweighed his caution. A few days later, the cargo arrived. It came in a massive, reinforced container, guarded by robotic sentinels. The container was strange, humming faintly with an energy he had never encountered. Sensors in his workshop picked up unusual readings, fluctuating energy levels and faint life signs, but the mechanic dismissed them as quirks of alien technology. He assumed the king had sent something experimental. With some effort, he opened the container. What he saw made him freeze. Inside, instead of a shiny alien ship, there was a small, albino wolf, curled up and trembling. Its fur was pure white, almost glowing under the lights, and its eyes were an icy shade of blue. The mechanic's mind raced. This was not what he expected. Not at all. He looked again, hoping he had misread the instructions. But the container was empty of any ship, and the wolf sat there, watching him with intelligence far beyond the normal animal. For a moment, the mechanic simply stared. The wolf's presence was unusual and almost eerie. It seemed fragile, yet its gaze was sharp and calculating, as if it understood everything happening in the room. The mechanic felt a mix of awe and suspicion. Why would the Galactic King send an albino wolf instead of a promised ship? Was this some kind of trick? A test? Or was it a mistake? He approached slowly, speaking softly to calm himself and the creature. The wolf did not move aggressively. It only lifted its head, studying him. Its breathing was shallow, and he noticed a faint, strange odor, a chemical tang mixed with something alive, something unnatural. He realized the creature might not be entirely safe. Still, he could not turn away. Something about the wolf drew him in, a strange connection that he could not explain. The mechanic decided to bring the wolf inside his workshop. He created a small, warm space for it, away from sensitive machinery. He fed it carefully, offering water and rations he usually kept for travelers. The wolf ate cautiously, sniffing every bite, as if testing it for danger. Over the next few hours, the mechanic observed it closely. He noticed subtle signs of intelligence. How it tilted its head when it didn't understand something. How it followed his movements with attention. and how it seemed to sense his emotions. As night fell, the mechanic sat quietly, thinking about the situation. He realized that the wolf was not just a mistake or a simple delivery. There was something deliberate about it, something hidden. The Galactic King was known for his cunning, and it was unlikely that he had sent the wolf by accident. The mechanic felt a mix of excitement and unease. He was curious about the wolf, yet he could not ignore the possibility that it might be dangerous. Despite the risk, he made a decision. He would care for the wolf and try to understand its nature. If the king wanted him to test his skills or his character, he would not back down. He was a mechanic, but he was also brave, and he knew that challenges like this did not come often. The next morning, he began examining the wolf more closely. He used scanning devices to check for signs of illness or contamination. He discovered faint traces of alien contamination energy patterns and biological markers that were unfamiliar to him. The wolf was not just alive. It carried something unusual within it, something that could be dangerous if handled carelessly. The mechanic realized he would need to be extremely careful. Every move, every action could have consequences he might not fully understand. Days passed, and the wolf grew stronger. It began to follow him around the workshop, sometimes resting near him while he worked, sometimes watching him intently as he repaired engines. The mechanic started to see it as more than a mysterious creature. It became a companion, a silent partner in his lonely days. He gave it a simple name, something that felt right, though he never spoke it aloud often. Through these days of observation and care, he began to understand that the wolf was not aggressive. It did not attack or threaten him. Instead, it displayed subtle intelligence and loyalty. It learned quickly, reacting to his gestures, understanding simple commands, and even anticipating his actions. The mechanic felt a growing admiration for the creature, but he could not ignore the underlying danger of the contamination it carried. He began making preparations to protect himself and the outpost. He reinforced the workshop, installed energy shields, and developed neutralization techniques for any potential hazards. He did not want the wolf to be harmed, but he also wanted to ensure that no one else would be at risk. Every precaution was necessary, yet every action drew him closer to the wolf, strengthening the bond between them. The mechanic often thought about the Galactic King during these days. What was the purpose of sending this wolf? Was it merely a test, or was it a part of a larger plan he could not yet see? He did not know, but he sensed that the wolf was the key. It was not a random delivery, and it was not a mistake. Somehow, the creature was connected to the king's intentions. An understanding it could unlock answers and perhaps opportunities beyond his imagination. By the end of the first week, the mechanic realized something important. The adventure he had been waiting for was not a shiny alien ship or a thrilling exploration. It was this creature. The albino wolf, strange, intelligent, and contaminated as it was, had become the center of his life, challenging him, teaching him patience, and testing his courage. He understood that the journey ahead would not be easy, but it would be unlike anything he had ever experienced. He looked at the wolf that night as it rested in its corner, its eyes reflecting the dim lights of the workshop. For the first time in a long while, the mechanic felt a spark of real excitement and purpose. He did not know what the future held, or what the Galactic King had planned, but he knew one thing: this was the beginning of a story far bigger than he could imagine. A story of trust, courage, and the mysterious bond between a human and a creature from beyond the stars. And so, the first chapter of this unusual adventure began not with a spaceship, not with fame or wealth, but with a quiet mechanic, a strange albino wolf, and the unknown challenge that lay ahead. The air of mystery and anticipation hung over the workshop like a thin veil, whispering promises of trials, discoveries, and a destiny that neither the mechanic nor the wolf could yet see. The next morning, the mechanic woke early, eager to continue studying the albino wolf. Its eyes followed him across the workshop, alert and intelligent, almost as if it could sense his thoughts. The wolf stretched slowly, its pale fur glowing faintly under the soft lights, and then padded over to the corner where it had begun sleeping. Despite its small size, it moved with an unusual grace, quiet and deliberate, making barely a sound. The mechanic felt a strange mix of awe and curiosity. He had dealt with machines and complex technology for years, but this was something different. The wolf was alive, breathing, thinking in ways he could only guess, and carrying within it something he didn't yet understand. He knew he had to be careful, yet he couldn't help feeling a connection. For the first time, his work felt personal, alive in a way no engine or device had ever been. He began examining the wolf more carefully. Using scanners and diagnostic tools, he tried to detect the contamination that had puzzled him before. The readings were irregular, fluctuating in ways he had never seen. It was clear the wolf carried something unusual, something alien. Yet it was not overtly dangerous, at least not yet. The mechanic realized that while he needed caution, he also needed to understand the creature, not just avoid it. As he observed the wolf, he noticed something peculiar. It was not just intelligent. It was curious. It sniffed the tools he used, touched his hand lightly with its nose, and sometimes even tilted its head as if questioning him. The mechanic smiled. It was as if the wolf wanted to communicate, but didn't know how. He decided he would try to learn its behavior, respond to its actions, and create a bond that could help both of them. He spent hours carefully interacting with the creature. He taught it small gestures, nodding when he wanted it to move, holding out his hand when he wanted it to approach. The wolf learned quickly. Within a day, it was responding to him, following simple instructions, and even seeming to anticipate his next move. The mechanic felt a mix of pride and wonder. This was no ordinary animal. It was far beyond anything he had ever encountered. Still, the wolf's presence was not without problems. As the mechanic worked, he noticed faint contamination in the air around it. Small sparks of energy would appear when it moved, and sometimes his instruments detected unusual biological readings. He realized that while the wolf was not overtly hostile, it carried a subtle risk. The contamination was alien, strange, and unpredictable, and he had to take precautions. He began reinforcing the workshop. Energy shields surrounded the wolf's corner, and special filters cleaned the air to reduce exposure. He built a small enclosure that allowed the wolf to move freely, but kept its contamination contained. The mechanic was meticulous, cautious, yet careful not to frighten the creature. Every adjustment was made with respect, and the wolf seemed to sense his intentions. It adapted quickly, moving confidently within its new space. Over the next few days, the mechanic noticed a change in the wolf's behavior. It became more interactive, more aware of its surroundings, and strangely playful at times. It would chase small objects, curl around his feet as he worked, and sometimes even rest its head in his lap. The mechanic felt a growing warmth toward it. He began thinking of it not just as a creature he had to monitor, but as a companion, someone who shared his daily life, even in this strange and unexpected way. Despite the bond, the mechanic could not ignore the wolf's unusual nature. He spent hours researching ancient records and alien databases, looking for clues about albino wolves in the galaxy. Slowly, a pattern emerged. Stories described creatures like this as rare, intelligent, and sometimes used by galactic royalty for special purposes, spies, messengers, or even guardians. The mechanic realized that the wolf sent by the Galactic King was likely part of a plan, not a random delivery. His curiosity deepened. Why the king would send a contaminated albino wolf instead of a ship remained a mystery. But the mechanic had begun to understand something important. The wolf was a test. It was not just a creature to care for. It was a challenge to his intelligence, patience, and courage. The mechanic felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. He had been tested before in his life, but never on this scale, and never in a way that combined danger, mystery, and companionship. The wolf also seemed to sense the mechanic's thoughts. Sometimes, when he worried or hesitated, it would come close, nuzzling his hand or resting against his arm. These small gestures were comforting. They reminded him that he was not alone, and that even in the strange isolation of the outpost, he had a companion he could trust. This growing bond made the mechanic more determined to face the challenges ahead. One afternoon, while performing routine checks on the wolf, the mechanic noticed something alarming. The contamination readings spiked unexpectedly. Small sparks of energy flickered in the air, and the wolf's eyes glowed faintly. The mechanic froze, realizing that he might be underestimating the creature's potential danger. He quickly activated the containment systems, calming the situation, and watched as the readings returned to normal. It was a wake-up call. The wolf was not just an unusual animal. It was a living, powerful, and unpredictable force. The mechanic realized that he needed to learn much more about it, understand its behavior, and prepare for any situation. He began documenting everything: the wolf's movements, reactions, and even subtle changes in its energy. He wanted to anticipate what might happen next, to be ready for the unexpected, and to protect both himself and the outpost. As the days turned into a week, the mechanic's routine became intertwined with the wolf's presence. He repaired engines with the wolf at his side, scanned alien devices while it observed, and spent quiet evenings thinking about the strange turn his life had taken. The once quiet, predictable life he had known was now filled with excitement, uncertainty, and purpose. He was no longer just a mechanic. He was a caretaker, a protector, and a participant in something larger than himself. Then, one evening, a new development occurred. The wolf began behaving unusually restless, alert, and almost urgent. It pawed at the workshop door, glancing toward the sensors outside, and then back at the mechanic. He followed its gaze and realized that something was approaching the outpost. Strange energy readings appeared on his instruments, and he felt a chill run down his spine. The wolf seemed to sense it too, standing rigid, ears twitching, eyes fixed on the door. The mechanic prepared cautiously. He armed emergency systems, activated shields, and watched the sensors closely. A faint hum grew louder, and then a small spacecraft landed outside. It was sleek, silent, and unlike any model he had seen before. The mechanic's heart raced. Was this another test from the Galactic King? Was it a delivery, or something more dangerous? The wolf moved closer to him, almost protective, and the mechanic realized he could not face this alone. He had learned to trust the creature, and now he understood that they needed each other. Together, they approached the door, hearts pounding, unsure of what awaited. When the door opened, the mechanic and the wolf saw a figure step out, an alien envoy. Small but imposing, with eyes that seemed to measure their every move. It carried a message from the Galactic King, simple yet profound. The test begins. Show your worth, and the path will open. The mechanic felt a mix of fear and excitement. The wolf barked softly, almost as if in agreement, and the mechanic nodded. They were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they were no longer just a mechanic and a creature. They were partners in a journey that would test their courage, intelligence, and trust. For the first time, the mechanic realized that the Galactic King's trick was not cruel. It was an invitation. The wolf, the contamination, the mysterious cargo, it was all part of a greater adventure, one that would push him beyond the boundaries of his quiet life. And as he looked at the albino wolf, glowing faintly in the dim light of the workshop, he understood one thing clearly. The journey had only just begun. The quiet mechanic, once content with routine, now stood at the threshold of a story far larger than he had ever imagined. The wolf, strange, intelligent, and unpredictable, was his companion, and together they would navigate the mysteries, dangers, and wonders that the galaxy had in store. And somewhere, high above, the Galactic King watched, testing, observing, and waiting for the moment when the true journey would unfold. The days after the envoy's visit were tense. The mechanic could feel a change in the air, subtle but undeniable. The wolf moved differently now, alert, cautious, as if it sensed something that the mechanic could not see. Even the normally calm workshop seemed to hum with energy, a faint vibration that set the sensors on edge. The contamination within the wolf was not static. It was alive, shifting, and the mechanic realized that ignoring it could be dangerous. He began to focus more on the wolf's condition. Each morning, he scanned it carefully, noting tiny fluctuations in its energy. Sometimes the readings spiked suddenly, making him step back in alarm. The wolf never attacked, but these energy bursts made the mechanic cautious. He reinforced the containment shields, adjusted the air filters, and carefully mapped the wolf's movements. Despite these precautions, he could not help feeling a growing connection. The creature was no longer just a challenge. It was a companion that depended on him, and he depended on it. One evening, while the mechanic was checking the wolf's energy levels, a spike occurred that startled him. A faint, glowing mist drifted from the wolf's fur, swirling around the workshop. The mechanic coughed, waving his hand to clear the air. The wolf did not move. It seemed almost calm, aware of the effect it caused. The mechanic realized that the contamination was not just physical, it was energetic, alien in a way that could influence machines, people, and even the environment. He decided that he had to learn more, not just observe. He set up multiple sensors, capturing every detail of the wolf's energy patterns. For hours he watched, noting how the energy fluctuated with its movements, breathing, and even emotional state. He began to understand that the wolf's contamination was not entirely harmful. It reacted to stress, fear, and curiosity, amplifying or diminishing accordingly. The mechanic realized that if he learned to control or predict it, he could safely interact with the creature and maybe even use its abilities in small ways. Despite the danger, he could not avoid caring for the wolf. Each day, he grew more aware of its intelligence. The wolf learned quickly, understanding the containment measures, responding to his instructions, and even anticipating the mechanic's actions. It seemed to sense his mood and often came close when he was frustrated or tired, resting its head on his knee. These small gestures comforted him, even as the potential danger of contamination lingered in the back of his mind. One night, after a particularly intense day of scanning and observation, the mechanic sat quietly, watching the wolf sleep. Its pale fur reflected the soft light of the workshop, and its breathing was slow and steady. The mechanic could not stop thinking about the Galactic King. Why had he sent this creature? Was it simply a test, or was there something more significant hidden behind its presence? He realized that understanding the wolf fully was key, not only to protecting himself, but also to unraveling the king's intentions. The next morning, a new problem emerged. The wolf began to behave strangely, pacing back and forth and occasionally stopping to sniff the air or paw at the walls. Its energy readings fluctuated wildly, far beyond anything the mechanic had seen before. He felt a surge of fear and urgency. Whatever was happening, it was escalating, and he needed to act quickly. He activated all containment protocols, reinforcing the energy shields and adjusting the airflow to reduce the contamination. As he worked, he noticed something remarkable. The wolf's eyes glowed faintly, and its energy seemed to interact with the shields themselves. Sparks of light danced across the surfaces, harmless but startling. The mechanic realized that the creature's contamination was not just passive, it could affect the environment, bending energy in ways that he could barely comprehend. He stepped back, awed and cautious, understanding that he was dealing with something far beyond ordinary life. Despite the risk, the mechanic could not ignore the wolf's signals. It seemed to be trying to communicate, guiding him toward something he could not yet see. He followed its movements carefully, watching its reactions to the readings on his instruments. Slowly, he began to notice a pattern. When the wolf paced near certain areas of the workshop, the energy readings stabilized. When it paused or growled softly, spikes occurred. The mechanic realized that the wolf was aware of its contamination and was somehow trying to manage it instinctively. This discovery changed everything. The mechanic realized that the wolf was not merely a hazard. It was a partner, capable of interacting with the environment in ways that could be useful if he understood them. He began experimenting cautiously, observing how the wolf responded to different stimuli: sound, light, movement. The wolf reacted quickly, adapting to his actions, and even learning to avoid areas where its contamination could cause problems. The mechanic felt a mixture of relief and admiration. This creature, strange and dangerous as it was intelligent and adaptable beyond anything he had imagined. Over the next few days, the mechanic and the wolf developed a rhythm. He would work on machinery while keeping a careful eye on the wolf, and the wolf would follow him, alert and responsive, sometimes nuzzling his hand when he paused. They communicated without words through gestures, glances, and subtle movements. The mechanic felt a deepening bond, a trust that grew stronger with each passing day. He began to see the wolf not as a problem or a test, but as a companion and ally, one that shared his work, his space, and his life. Yet the danger never fully disappeared. One afternoon, a sudden spike in contamination forced the mechanic to act quickly. Sparks of energy flew from the wolf's fur, brushing against the machinery and causing temporary malfunctions. The mechanic worked fast, stabilizing the readings, calming the wolf, and repairing the minor damage. As he worked, he realized that this was not simply a challenge, it was a lesson in responsibility, patience, and trust. He had to understand the wolf fully, respect its abilities, and protect both it and the world around him. The wolf, surprisingly, seemed to sense this. After the incident, it stayed close to the mechanic, resting calmly and avoiding sudden movements. The mechanic felt a wave of relief and gratitude. Despite the danger, they were learning to work together, to anticipate each other's needs, and to face challenges as a team. He realized that this partnership was unlike anything he had experienced before. As the days passed, the mechanic also began to notice subtle signs of the wolf's health improving. Its energy spikes became less erratic, and it moved with greater confidence. He realized that his care, attention, and the safe environment he created were helping the creature adapt. This gave him hope. Perhaps the wolf's contamination could be managed entirely, allowing them to interact more freely and explore the full potential of its abilities. One evening, the mechanic sat in the workshop, exhausted but satisfied with their progress. The wolf lay nearby, its head resting lightly on his tools, eyes half closed in contentment. For a moment, the mechanic allowed himself to imagine the possibilities. With the wolf's intelligence and unique abilities, they could face challenges he had never dreamed of. He could learn from the creature, understand the king's intentions, and perhaps even unlock new technologies hidden in the galaxy. But even as he considered the future, he knew the present demanded vigilance. The contamination was real, unpredictable, and potentially dangerous. He could not allow carelessness to endanger either himself, the wolf, or the outpost. He would continue observing, experimenting, and learning, always balancing caution with curiosity, fear with trust. That night, as he prepared for sleep, the wolf curled up nearby, emitting a faint glow that lit the corner of the workshop. The mechanic watched it, thinking about the strange path his life had taken. Just a few days ago, he had been repairing engines in quiet solitude, with no thought of adventure or challenge. Now, he was at the center of a living mystery, caring for a creature unlike any other, navigating danger, and preparing for challenges that could test him in ways he had never imagined. And he knew that this was only the beginning. The contamination was a puzzle, the wolf was a partner, and the Galactic King's intentions remained a mystery. Each day brought new surprises, new challenges, and new lessons. The mechanic realized that his skills, patience, and courage would be tested, and that success depended not only on his abilities, but also on the trust and bond he shared with the albino wolf Dot as the lights of the outpost dimmed. The mechanic and the wolf rested side by side, each aware of the other's presence, each ready for whatever the next day might bring. In the quiet of the workshop, the mechanic allowed himself a small smile. He was no longer just a mechanic, fixing machines and following routines. He was a caretaker, a protector, and a partner in a story that stretched far beyond the walls of his workshop and the stars he had once admired from a distance. The wolf stirred slightly, sensing the mechanic's thoughts, and nuzzled his hand. The mechanic reached out, feeling the warmth and softness of its fur. In that simple gesture, he felt the trust, the bond, and the promise of a journey that neither of them could fully foresee. And with that, he closed his eyes, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, discoveries, and perhaps the answers to the mysteries that the Galactic King had set in motion. The adventure was far from over, but for the first time, the mechanic felt ready. The wolf was no longer just a test, it was a companion. The mechanic had been observing the albino wolf for weeks now, and during that time he had grown accustomed to its presence, its strange energy, and even the unpredictable spikes of contamination. Yet something about the creature continued to puzzle him. It was not just intelligent, it was deliberate, cautious, and in some way aware of its purpose. The mechanic felt that there was a story hidden in the wolf's existence, a story that he needed to uncover if he hoped to understand the challenges that lay ahead. One quiet evening, while the wolf rested in its corner, the mechanic began examining his databases and ancient records, looking for any clues about creatures like this. His fingers hovered over the controls, scanning historical archives, government reports, and old galactic texts. Finally, he stumbled upon a series of references to albino wolves in the galaxy. These were not ordinary animals. They were rare, sometimes used as companions, guards, or even messengers by rulers and royalty in distant systems. The mechanic's heart raced. Could it be that the Galactic King had sent the wolf for a reason beyond a simple test? Could it be that this creature carried intelligence, history, or even a mission of its own? As he read further, he discovered that these wolves had abilities beyond the ordinary. They could sense energy, detect danger, and even communicate in subtle ways with those who were patient enough to understand them. The mechanic realized that the wolf in his workshop was far more than a strange delivery. It was a being of purpose and significance. He turned to look at the wolf, which was now observing him closely. Its icy blue eyes seemed to hold understanding, as if it knew that he had discovered something important. The wolf lifted its head, tilted slightly, and let out a soft, almost thoughtful sound. The mechanic felt a shiver run down his spine. He had suspected intelligence before, but this felt like something deeper. The wolf was not just aware of him, it was aware of its own place in the unfolding story. Determined to learn more, the mechanic began documenting every detail of the wolf's behavior. He noted how it responded to light, sound, and movement. He recorded its reactions to different tools and materials, observing patterns that seemed deliberate. The more he studied, the clearer it became. The wolf was not only intelligent, but capable of learning and adapting quickly, almost as if it had been trained for a very specific purpose. Days turned into nights as the mechanic continued his research. He noticed small details that others might have missed, the way the wolf responded to certain energy frequencies, the subtle gestures it made when it wanted attention, and the way it seemed to anticipate his actions. It was almost as if the wolf understood his intentions before he even acted. He realized that this bond, this connection, was not accidental. The Galactic King had not simply sent him a creature. He had sent a partner, a being that could challenge him, teach him, and perhaps guide him through the trials ahead. One afternoon, while running a series of tests on the wolf's energy patterns, the mechanic discovered something startling. The contamination it carried was not entirely harmful. It was reactive. It responded to the mechanic's presence, to his voice, and even to his emotions. When he approached calmly, the readings stabilized. When he acted hastily or with stress, the energy fluctuated wildly. The mechanic realized that the wolf's contamination was linked to its awareness and intelligence. It was not just a hazard. It was a communication, a signal that could be understood and respected if he paid close attention. With this understanding, the mechanic began experimenting more deliberately. He adjusted his approach, speaking softly, moving slowly, and observing the wolf's reactions. Gradually, he learned to anticipate its behavior, to calm its energy, and even to interact with it in ways that reduced the contamination spikes. The wolf, in turn, began to trust him more. It would approach his workbench, sit quietly nearby, and watch as he repaired machines. Sometimes it would even nudge tools toward him or gesture in ways that seemed purposeful. The mechanic felt a growing sense of partnership. The wolf was no longer just a challenge or a test. It was a collaborator, a being that shared his space, his work, and even his thoughts in subtle ways. He realized that the bond they were forming was not just emotional. It was practical. Understanding the wolf, respecting its intelligence, and working with it allowed him to manage the contamination and even utilize its abilities in small ways. One evening, as the mechanic reviewed his notes, he realized that the wolf's behavior hinted at something larger. Certain gestures, patterns, and reactions suggested that it was aware of a mission beyond the workshop. It seemed to know that the Galactic King's plan was more complex than he had imagined. The wolf's intelligence, its ability to sense energy, and its subtle communication were all part of a puzzle that the mechanic needed to solve. Determined to uncover the truth, the mechanic began researching the history of the Galactic King himself. He discovered that the king was renowned for testing those he trusted, often using indirect methods to assess character, intelligence, and courage. The mechanic realized that the wolf was part of this test-a-living, intelligent component designed to challenge him, observe him, and perhaps prepare him for something far greater. Over the next few days, the mechanic continued to bond with the wolf while preparing for potential challenges. He adjusted his workshop, reinforced containment systems, and developed methods to stabilize the wolf's energy. He spoke to it gently, encouraged it to explore its surroundings safely, and rewarded calm behavior. Each interaction strengthened their partnership, building trust and mutual understanding. One night, a breakthrough occurred. The wolf, sensing the mechanic's intent, guided him to a hidden compartment in the workshop. Using subtle gestures and nudges, it indicated that something was concealed beneath the floor panels. Curious, the mechanic carefully opened the compartment. Inside, he found a small, intricate device alien in origin, humming with faint energy. The wolf watched intently, as if waiting for him to understand its significance. The mechanic realized that the wolf had been trying to communicate something important. It was not just a creature to care for. It was a guide, leading him to discoveries that were crucial to the king's plan. The device pulsed with energy, responding to the wolf's presence. The mechanic studied it carefully, understanding that this was a piece of advanced technology, perhaps a key to understanding the larger purpose behind the wolf's delivery. Excitement and anticipation filled the workshop. The mechanic realized that the Galactic King's trick had a deeper meaning. The wolf was not a replacement for a ship or a simple test. It was a living guide, a partner in discovery, and a key to understanding the galaxy in ways he had never imagined. He felt a surge of determination. He would not fail. He would learn from the wolf, understand the technology, and uncover the full plan, no matter how challenging. The wolf, sensing his resolve, seemed to respond with subtle movements of encouragement. It nuzzled his hand, then stepped back, allowing him space to explore the device. The mechanic worked carefully, studying the alien technology, noting its functions, and beginning to piece together its purpose. He realized that this was a turning point, a moment when observation, patience, and partnership had led to discovery. Days passed as the mechanic continued to explore the device with the wolf at his side. The more he learned, the clearer it became. The wolf was not merely intelligent. It was part of a network, a system designed by the Galactic King to test, guide, and prepare him for future challenges. The contamination, the behavior, the energy patterns, all were connected to a larger purpose, one that demanded patience, courage, and understanding. By the end of the week, the mechanic felt a deep sense of accomplishment. He had uncovered part of the mystery, strengthened his bond with the wolf, and learned to manage the contamination. He understood that the Galactic King's plan was far more intricate than he had imagined, but he also knew that he was ready to continue the journey. The wolf was no longer just a challenge. It was a partner, a guide, and a friend. That night, the mechanic and the wolf sat side by side in the quiet workshop. The alien device hummed softly nearby, a reminder of the discoveries yet to come. The mechanic looked at the wolf, its pale fur glowing faintly, and realized something profound. The greatest adventures were not about machines, ships, or treasures. They were about trust, partnership, and the courage to face the unknown with a companion who shared your journey. The Galactic King's trick had been clever, even cruel in its design, but it had also created an opportunity. The mechanic understood now that the wolf was not just a delivery or a test. It was a teacher, a guide, and the key to uncovering the king's intentions. And as he watched the wolf rest, alert even in sleep, he knew that together they would face whatever challenges awaited, ready to explore the mysteries of the galaxy, solve the puzzles before them, and navigate the dangers that lay ahead. The workshop was quiet, yet full of potential. The mechanic felt a surge of purpose and anticipation. He knew that this was only the beginning, that the wolf's guidance and intelligence would continue to reveal secrets, and that his courage, patience, and ingenuity would be tested in ways he had never imagined. And with that thought, he leaned back, letting the quiet of the night settle around them, ready for the discoveries, challenges, and... The mechanic had spent weeks caring for the albino wolf, studying its behavior, and slowly uncovering the secrets it carried. He had begun to understand the contamination, the strange energy, and the intelligence within the creature. Yet despite all he had learned, one question remained unanswered. Why had the Galactic King sent this wolf instead of a promised ship? The mystery gnawed at him, and he knew he could not move forward without confronting the king directly. He prepared carefully. The Galactic King was known for his cunning, and anyone who approached him unprepared often faced consequences far worse than disappointment. The mechanic double-checked his tools, scanned the wolf's energy, and reinforced the containment systems. He needed to ensure that nothing would go wrong, that the wolf would remain safe, and that he could handle whatever the king might throw at him. When the time came, the mechanic and the wolf set out toward the king's palace. The journey was long and filled with tension. The wolf stayed close, alert and silent, as if sensing the importance of their mission. The mechanic felt a mix of anticipation and unease. He had prepared for the unknown, but the thought of facing the king, a ruler who had outwitted countless beings across the galaxy, made his heart race. Finally, they arrived at the palace. The structure was massive, unlike anything the mechanic had ever seen. Towers of shimmering metal rose into the sky, and the walls pulsed faintly with energy. Guards stationed along the entrance watched them closely, yet made no move to stop them. It was clear that the king had been expecting them. The mechanic tightened his grip on his tools, glanced at the wolf, and stepped inside. The palace was both beautiful and intimidating. Energy flowed through the halls like visible currents, and strange symbols glowed on the walls. The mechanic felt small in comparison, but he reminded himself of the wolf at his side and of everything they had accomplished together. The wolf's presence gave him courage, grounding him in the middle of an environment filled with unknown power. At last, they entered Grand Chamber. The Galactic King waited, seated on a throne that seemed to float above the floor. His eyes were sharp, observing, and they seemed to look right through the mechanic. There was an air of authority and cunning that made the mechanic feel both awe and fear. He stepped forward, bowing slightly, and the wolf moved to his side, standing quietly but alert. The king spoke, his voice deep and commanding. "I see you have managed well so far. The wolf has been informative. Tell me, what have you learned?" The mechanic hesitated for a moment, then spoke honestly. "Your Majesty, I have learned that the wolf is intelligent, aware of its contamination. I have studied its behavior, observed its energy, and learned to work with it. It is more than a creature. It is a partner, a guide, and a test." The king's eyes narrowed slightly, and a faint smile appeared. "Indeed, that is correct. The wolf was sent to test more than your skill with machines or your courage. It was sent to see your judgment, your patience, and your ability to understand the unknown. Few can see beyond the obvious and recognize the deeper purpose." The mechanic felt a mixture of relief and pride. He had succeeded in understanding part of the king's plan, but he also sensed that more lay ahead. "And the promised ship?" he asked cautiously. "Was it ever meant to be delivered?" The king's smile grew, almost playful. "The ship was never the reward. The reward was knowledge, understanding, and the bond you formed with the wolf. Few beings can form such trust with a creature that carries danger within it. That in itself is a sign of worthiness." The mechanic's mind raced. It was not the ship he had imagined, but the king's words carried weight. The test was not about material wealth or technology. It was about character, intelligence, and courage. The wolf had been a teacher, a guide, and a measure of his worth. He realized that the king's intentions were far more sophisticated than he had first imagined. Then the king gestured toward the wolf. "You have cared for it, understood it, and worked with it. That is commendable. But there is one final lesson. True understanding comes when one can act decisively, without fear, for the good of others." The mechanic looked at the wolf, which seemed to understand the king's words. Its eyes glowed faintly, pulsing with energy. He realized that this final test was not just about him. It was about protecting the wolf, the palace, and perhaps countless others from the risks its contamination carried. He knew what he had to do. Carefully, he examined the wolf's energy, tracing the patterns that had caused spikes and instability in the past. Using all the knowledge he had gained, he began to stabilize the creature's contamination. He adjusted energy channels, used shielding techniques, and spoke calmly to the wolf. Slowly, the readings normalized. The wolf relaxed, its glowing eyes dimming to a calm blue. The mechanic had acted decisively, using patience, knowledge, and courage. The king observed silently, then nodded approvingly. You see now, the wolf's contamination was not merely a hazard. It was a test of your ability to act wisely, under pressure, and with care. Few could succeed. Few would have the wisdom to understand that danger is not always what it seems, and that trust can be earned even in unexpected places. The mechanic felt a deep sense of accomplishment. He had faced the unknown, understood the wolf, and acted decisively when it mattered most. The lessons were clear. Patience, observation, and empathy were as important as skill and courage. He realized that the Galactic King had sent the wolf not to deceive him, but to prepare him for challenges he could not yet imagine. Then the king spoke again, his voice softer but no less commanding. You have proven yourself. You have earned not a ship, but something far greater, trust. You understand the wolf, and through that understanding, you have demonstrated the qualities necessary to face challenges that few can endure. The mechanic felt a swell of pride, tempered by humility. He had not been seeking glory or recognition. He had sought understanding, driven by curiosity and a desire to do right. And in the process, he had formed a bond with a creature unlike any other, one that had guided him, challenged him, and ultimately helped him grow. The king gestured toward the wolf once more. It is yours to keep. Its abilities, intelligence, and loyalty are now yours to guide and protect. Use it wisely, and you will find that the galaxy holds opportunities and knowledge beyond your imagination. The mechanic knelt beside the wolf, gently resting his hand on its soft fur. The creature looked at him, eyes bright and aware, and let out a quiet sound, almost as if it were acknowledging their shared journey. The mechanic realized that this was not the end of the adventure. It was the beginning of a partnership that would carry them into new challenges, discoveries, and experiences across the stars dot as they left the palace. The mechanic felt a mixture of awe and determination. The Galactic King's test had been far more than a challenge of skill. It had been a journey of understanding, patience, and courage. He had learned that wisdom often comes in unexpected forms. That trust can be built even in the most unusual circumstances. And that partnership can turn danger into opportunity. The wolf walked beside him, alert and calm, its pale fur glowing faintly in the dim light of the corridor. The mechanic felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had faced the test, understood its lessons, and emerged stronger, wiser, and ready for the future. Together, they would navigate the unknown, face the dangers that awaited, and uncover the secrets of the galaxy, guided by trust, courage, and the bond that had been forged through understanding and care dot by the time they reached the workshop. The mechanic realized that the lessons of the palace would stay with him forever. The Galactic King's trick had been clever, even harsh in its design, but it had revealed something far more valuable than a ship or treasure. It had shown him the importance of observation, patience, and empathy, and it had given him a companion whose intelligence, loyalty, and courage would shape the adventures to come. The wolf, sensing the mechanic's reflection, rested its head on his lap, a small gesture that carried profound meaning. The mechanic smiled, understanding fully that their journey together had only just begun. And as they settled back into the quiet of the workshop, he knew that whatever challenges awaited contamination, danger, or the unknown, he would face them with courage, wisdom, and a partner who had proven time and again that even the most unexpected creatures could hold the key to understanding the galaxy dot in the quiet. With the wolf by his side, the mechanic allowed himself a moment of peace. He had faced the Galactic King, understood the wolf, and proven himself worthy. The lessons were clear, the bond was strong, and the journey ahead was filled with possibilities. Together, they would explore, discover, and navigate the challenges of the galaxy, guided by trust, courage, and the deep understanding that comes from facing the unknown and emerging stronger. After leaving the Galactic King's palace, the mechanic felt a mix of relief, pride, and anticipation. He had faced a challenge that tested every part of him: his intelligence, courage, patience, and empathy. He had learned to understand and bond with the albino wolf, and through that bond he had proven himself worthy in the eyes of the king. Yet, despite the accomplishment, he knew that the journey was not over. This was only the beginning of a life far beyond the quiet routines he had known before. Back in the workshop, the wolf settled comfortably into its familiar corner. But this time it seemed calmer, more confident, and even aware of its role in the mechanic's life. Its energy, once unpredictable and sometimes alarming, had stabilized. The mechanic watched it with admiration, realizing that their partnership had grown stronger than ever. They had learned from each other, understood each other, and now shared a bond that could withstand challenges beyond imagination. The mechanic began to reflect on everything that had happened. When the Galactic King had sent the wolf, he had intended a simple trick, or so it seemed. Instead, he had provided a teacher, a guide, and a test that revealed not just the mechanic's abilities, but his character. He realized that the true reward was not a ship or material wealth, but the knowledge, experience, and partnership that had formed through the trials. That understanding filled him with a sense of purpose that he had never felt before. He began to plan the next steps. The galaxy was vast, full of mysteries, challenges, and opportunities. With the wolf by his side, he could explore places he had only dreamed of, uncover knowledge that others could not reach, and face dangers that required courage and wisdom. He thought of the king's words about trust, responsibility, and understanding. And he knew that his journey was now about more than just survival. It was about discovery, growth, and making a difference in ways he had not imagined. As days passed, the mechanic and the wolf established a daily rhythm. He worked on machinery, repaired alien devices, and experimented with technology, always mindful of the wolf's energy and abilities. The wolf stayed near him, attentive and intelligent, sometimes nudging tools toward him or responding to his gestures. Their communication had become seamless, built on observation, respect, and trust. It was a partnership that went beyond words, one that made even the most complicated tasks manageable. The mechanic also began sharing his discoveries with other allies in the galaxy. Word of his skills, courage, and the unique wolf companion spread, and he found himself invited to help in projects that required not just technical skill, but intelligence, patience, and insight. He realized that the Galactic King's test had prepared him for this larger role, not just as a mechanic, but as a problem solver, a guide, and a trusted ally in the galaxy. Even as his reputation grew, the mechanic never lost sight of the wolf. He understood that the bond they shared was rare, precious, and vital. The wolf was more than a creature. It was a companion who had challenged him, guided him, and helped him grow. Together, they navigated complex situations, solved problems that others could not, and faced dangers with courage and wisdom. Each day brought new lessons, new challenges, and new ways to understand each other. One morning, the mechanic received a message from the Galactic King himself. The message was simple but powerful. You have proven yourself. Continue to trust the wolf, to act with wisdom, and to face the unknown with courage. The galaxy is vast, and your journey is just beginning. The mechanic smiled. The king's words were not just praise. They were an invitation to continue exploring, learning, and growing. The wolf, sensing the mechanic's excitement, wagged its tail and emitted a soft, calm sound. The mechanic reached down and stroked its fur, feeling the warmth and intelligence that had become a source of comfort and strength. They had been through tests, challenges, and dangers together, and now they were ready to face whatever the galaxy could throw at them. Over the next weeks, The mechanic and the wolf embarked on new adventures. They explored abandoned stations, repaired damaged spacecraft, and helped communities in distant star systems. The wolf's unique abilities were invaluable. Its intelligence, awareness, and energy sensing allowed them to navigate hazards, detect hidden dangers, and solve complex problems. The mechanic realized that the wolf was not just a companion, it was a partner in every sense. And their teamwork was unmatched. Through these adventures, the mechanic learned more about himself than he had ever known. He discovered courage he did not realize he had, patience in moments of uncertainty, and wisdom in situations where a hasty decision could have disastrous consequences. The wolf had not only been a test, it had been a mirror reflecting his strengths, weaknesses, and potential. He realized that the Galactic King had given him the greatest gift possible, the chance to grow, to learn, and to discover his true capabilities. Even with all the excitement and discovery, the mechanic never lost the quiet moments of reflection. He would sit in the workshop, watching the wolf rest, thinking about the path that had led him here. From the moment the king had sent the contaminated albino wolf, his life had been transformed. What had seemed like a trick or a test had become a journey of growth, understanding, and friendship. The mechanic felt gratitude not just to the king, but to the wolf for the guidance, challenges, and companionship that had shaped his journey. One day, while exploring a distant research station, the mechanic and the wolf uncovered an ancient map that hinted at hidden knowledge in the galaxy technology, history, and discoveries that had been lost for centuries. The mechanic's heart raced with excitement. This was exactly the type of adventure he had been prepared for. With the wolf by his side, he felt ready to uncover secrets, solve mysteries, and explore the galaxy in ways he had only dreamed of. As they prepared to follow the map, the mechanic reflected on the lessons he had learned. He understood that every challenge, every spike of contamination, and every moment of uncertainty had taught him patience, trust, and courage. The wolf had been both a teacher and a companion, guiding him through experiences that had tested him to the core. And now, as they stepped into the unknown, he knew that their bond would see them through whatever lay ahead. The wolf, alert and ready, walked beside him as they activated the coordinates from the map. Energy readings pulsed in ways that the mechanic recognized, signaling both danger and discovery. He felt a sense of exhilaration. This was not just exploration. It was the culmination of everything he had learned, every test he had passed, and every lesson the Galactic King had taught him through the wolf. As they traveled further into uncharted regions, the mechanic noticed subtle changes in the wolf's behavior. It would pause at certain coordinates, sniff the air, or glance at the mechanic with a knowing look. These cues guided him, helping him navigate obstacles, avoid hazards, and discover hidden pathways. He realized that the wolf's intelligence and awareness were unmatched, and that their partnership had grown beyond simple companionship. It was a seamless, intuitive bond. Through their journeys, the mechanic came to understand a fundamental truth. True adventure was not about speed, wealth, or glory. It was about learning, growing, and forming bonds that could withstand challenges. The wolf had taught him that courage and intelligence were important, but empathy, trust, and understanding were what allowed a being to thrive in the face of uncertainty. Months passed as they explored, discovered, and solved challenges across the galaxy. Each day brought new lessons, surprises, and moments of awe. The mechanic felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that he had not only survived the Galactic King's test, but had also used it as a foundation to grow, explore, and make a difference. The wolf remained by his side, alert, intelligent, and ever loyal. A living reminder of the journey that had begun with a trick, a test, and a bond that had changed everything. Finally, as they returned to the workshop one evening, the mechanic looked at the stars, and reflected on the path he had traveled. From a quiet, predictable life of repairing machines, he had been thrust into a journey of challenge, discovery, and growth. The Galactic King's test had seemed daunting, even unfair at first, but it had transformed him, guiding him toward a life full of purpose, partnership, and endless possibilities. The wolf rested beside him, calm and aware, its glowing eyes reflecting the light of distant stars. The mechanic smiled, realizing that their journey was far from over. There would be new discoveries, new challenges, and perhaps new tests, but he was ready. With the wolf as his companion, teacher, and guide, he felt prepared for whatever the galaxy could present. And so, the mechanic's life had changed forever. What had begun as a trick from a galactic king had turned into the greatest adventure of his life, a journey of understanding, courage, trust, and discovery. He had learned to face the unknown with wisdom, to act with care, and to value bonds above all else. The wolf had been his guide, his partner, and his friend, and together they had turned a challenge into a story of triumph, growth, and limitless possibility. As the workshop lights dimmed and the galaxy stretched endlessly outside, the mechanic rested, knowing that the adventure would continue. But he also knew one thing with certainty: he was no longer alone. He had a companion, a guide, and a bond forged through trials and trust. The journey of T